In an ideal world, everyone would be drawn to their first commander deck by serendipity. You'd close your eyes in front of the Scryfall search bar, wave your hand, and when they opened, there it would be. The perfect commander for you. Pulled through the blind eternities right to your monitor. More realistically, it'd be nice just to know that you would enjoy a certain commander by looking at it. Unfortunately, we aren't omniscient, nor can we see the future. But what we are is a collaborative people. As someone with experience having aspiring commander players come up to him and ask for help building their first deck, the classic response of pick whoever you like is a great answer, until they respond with, I don't know what I like. Some people tend to learn better by doing. They like to jump into the meat of the action and want to get their hands on cardboard as soon as possible. These kinds of players will learn the ins and outs eventually, but to do that, they'll need somewhere to start. So, to all overwhelmed newbies and stumped mentors out there, I have some advice for helping design a deck built for brand new players. Let's start with colors. As experienced players know, building incredibly color-intensive decks is entirely possible. Heck, many of the best commanders in the game are 5 colors. This comes with a caveat, however, that certain strategies that make these work are lost on newer players. Fetching for colors you don't have access to in your original hand, playing tapped dual lands or triumphs first, etc. When you're trying to remember how to even put mana into your pool, getting bogged down in color requirements can be a bit frustrating. 1 color is pretty limiting, but focused. 2 colors lets players learn about multicolor requirements while still meeting those requirements consistently. 3 and up start to get a bit more complex, but can still be doable. I'll keep this short and say that a good rule of thumb is that 1 to 3 colors are usually fine. But especially with all the great 2-color legendary creatures coming out recently, that's always a pretty safe bet. Color is a relatively small part of the discussion though, so it's hard to go too wrong here. What's more important is making sure that the deck is functional in the first place. And to be functional, you have to have lands to cast your spells with. If you want a perfect number, Karsten has done some great work with regression analysis and other calculus sort of algorithms to determine how many you should actually run. That'll be linked in the video's description, and it's a really great resource. But my advice here is to simply increase the number of lands in the beginner deck slightly from where an experienced player would otherwise be comfortable. So, for instance, all else being equal, I personally play 36 lands in most of my decks. But I also know how to mulligan aggressively for the things I want, and what those things are, due to experience with my decks. A newer player is more likely to take opening hands that have issues, and that's okay, it's how you learn. But having too many lands is usually much better than having too few. At least when you've got too many lands, you can cast your commander. Also, having a higher land density will mean that opening hands are playable more often. With 39 to 40 lands, there are going to be plentiful first and second hands that will have a usable number of mana sources, usually 3 or more. It's also pretty easy to swap out a few lands for other cards later on when you get confident. Just don't cut too many when that happens. 36 lands is risky, 31 lands is a crime. Okay, now that your lands are settled, what better to talk about next than the things you're going to be playing most often with them? Say it with me, everyone. Ramp, card advantage, and removal. Ramp is anything that nets you additional mana on following turns repeatedly. Card advantage is anything that draws enough cards to replace itself and then some, and removal is something that interacts with another player's board or interrupts what's on the stack. You may be tempted to skimp on these, primarily removal, for a first deck. And I get it. They sound boring compared to your big splashy plays, but it's incredibly important for people to work on their play patterns and threat assessment early on in their Magic career. Learning to play ramp before other cards to reap the extra mana on later turns, for example, is something that players learn for life after seeing how effective it is. Experienced players know instinctively that these belong in basically every deck, but they may be tempted to trim them for a newcomer to help simplify gameplay, or the newbie themselves might be unimpressed when comparing them side by side with yet another 13 mana Eldrazi. My advice is, don't trim these. Learning when to develop and interrupt resources versus when to play your own threats is the ebb and flow of Magic. Simplifying this can not only have them lose more games than they otherwise would, but can also turn off players who are looking for a deeper, richer experience. But threats aren't to be disregarded. On the contrary, the game plan you pick can also help you retain newer players. Whether it's a complex Rube Goldberg machine that spirals endlessly as your friends wait patiently for their turn again, or a more straightforward unga bunga I hit you with a big number until your life total is 0, eventually resources need to convert somehow into winning the game. But what game plans are better for newer players? You may be expecting me to say something like, the simpler the better, but I've found that in actuality, a lot of new players fall in love with the game regardless of how many pieces their puzzle has. From what I've seen, a game plan that has redundancy seems to be the determining factor in what clicks faster. Let's say you've got a Super Friends deck, or a Planeswalker deck for the uninitiated. Every Planeswalker in it is probably going to be significantly different in effect than the others. Very few Planeswalkers have that much overlap in what they do, outside of just being generally powerful and sharing weakness to attackers. Okay, then the cards that synergize with them are also going to be mostly one-offs, like Pramicon to keep them safe from attackers, the Chain Veil to double up on their abilities, and Doubling Season to allow the walkers to do their ultimates right out of the box. These are effective cards, but they're all entirely unique, and each requires a mental load to evaluate on its own. Not to mention, if any of these get removed and you don't have recursion, you can't go looking for another of the same type of effect in your deck. The mental load of each one is entirely balanced on the individual card. On the other hand, I've got a life gain deck that runs 5 different cards that all make an angel token as a payoff on your end step for gaining life during your turn. If a newer player casts one of these in a game, they will be learning to evaluate 5 cards in the deck at the same time. In this way, these 5 cards help out by sharing the mental load together while playing. This helps newer players fight against the burnout that comes with information overload. Also, seeing a new card and being able to talk about how you can compare it to a card you've played before is the foundation of all new card analysis, which will bring people into the discussion and culture of the game faster. They'll feel like a part of the community. Some examples of strategies that have a lot of redundancy are token generation, +1/+1 counters, spell slingers, graveyard, and blink decks. Each of these has a litany of alternatives to any individual card they could possibly be running. Oh, also small benefit to redundancy, if the new player is helping make the deck, it's hard to choose wrong between similar effects. If they're debating between Ponder and Serum Visions, for example, in a Spellslinger's deck, either choice is probably going to do well for them. Alright, time to talk commander choice. This is largely a conglomeration of the things we talked about earlier, but there's also the additional wrinkle of consistency here. You'll always have access to this card. So if the commander itself generates a resource like mana or card advantage, it'll reduce the number of games where the deck isn't functioning properly, even with a bad opening hand. This applies to everyone, by the way, not just new players. Outside of this, the choice in lead singer is largely less important than it initially appears, and I'd recommend choosing one based on how well they facilitate a beginner-friendly deck in other ways, rather than how easy they appear to be to play. As a reminder, this only applies if the person does not know what kind of deck they want to play. Alright, putting this into practice, let's work with an example. Let's start with Toski. Toski's a good choice for a lot of reasons. The deck plays a lot of big green stompy creatures and overrun effects, which are both pretty common, meaning a lot of redundancy in both your primary card type and your win condition. You're in a single color, which risks being limiting, but at least it keeps things focused. The commander itself draws you cards, fantastic, and has indestructible to keep people from sending you back to the Stone Age with removal. Mono green also tends to run lots of lands and land support, encouraging you to bump up the mana count. It has some issues with its bread and butters though, since mono green has weird removal, and your commander drawing cards is inherently going to throw off the amount of card draw you want to run in the actual deck. Overall though, the funny Indestructisquirrel is a great pick. Alright, other side of this coin time. Atraxa Praetor's Voice. Right off the bat, she's 4 color, and her cost to play is all 4 pips. This rewards an experienced pilot with a really tuned mana base. She doesn't give you any resources herself outside of lifelink gaining you life, which is nice, but it doesn't really help dig you out of bad opening hands. Her bread and butters are fantastic since being in every color but red gives you tons of options, but her strategy is all over the place. In fact, charge counters, +1/+1 counters, weird counters like Divinity on the Myojins from Kamigawa. All of these things are possible routes to play with her, with varying degrees of redundancy. This also incidentally makes her EDH rec page, a resource a lot of newer players rely on, a bit of a total mess. You'll find cards from all of the above and more strategies, which makes an easy trap to spread new players too thin in how many cards are dedicating for each of the strategies in the deck. Of course, none of these things are deal breakers on their own, and you can still have a great first deck with Atraxa. My point is, she lends herself to being a worse training deck than other possible choices. But maybe you disagree with that. Was there something else I should have mentioned? Maybe you made a killer first Atraxa deck and want to tell me what an idiot I am. Or just want to talk about some of your experiences when you were a beginner player. Well, that's what the comments are for. I'd love to hear your stories and share some of my own down there. Hopefully, this helped steer you away a bit from the decision paralysis that comes with choosing a first deck. The most important thing, honestly, is to make a decision. Any decision. There are few people that get it right in one go. Playing with and against a variety of different strategies is much, much more likely to show you what you're going to gravitate towards in a game of Magic than staring at card text for hours on Scryfall. But you can't do that without making a choice and jumping headfirst into the game. Good luck out there, and I hope this helped.